Deviance and Control, Mental Illness. Presentation by Carlos A. Mendoza. Early examination of mental illness. So growing up, going to school, elementary school, I had views of what I felt defined what mental illness was. People that didn't think like me, then talk like me, didn't walk like me, didn't dress like me, were in a separate kind of playground than me. Something was wrong with them. They didn't fit what I constituted as normal. You know. Then later on, being more independent, I got to see other people like people on the street that I considered crazy because they would talk to themselves, they would scream for no reason. Working in behavioral health today, I'm able to now to have a different view, and I love the direction in which we're going today in behavioral health. We've actually gotten rid of referring it to as mental illness. We now refer it as mental wellness, behavioral health, and I really like the positive reinforcements we're doing now and changing that label for the better. Limitations. So all the stigma that I had talked about earlier, you know, we're going to be addressing here, which are some barriers and limitations. With my thoughts and what I feel a lot of people think, it characterizes a person as less than, and I'm not going to lie, when I was younger, immature, I felt, people were less than, that were like that. I was better, you know. It demoralizes individuals. And this, again, goes to adding stigma and labels to an individual just because they're different, because they're deviant in what we're learning today, no pun intended. But they deviate from what we consider the norm, And if you guys can see me, I'm doing the quotation with my fingers, but you guys can't. So just know I'm quoting the norm. Characteristics of mental disorders. Now, in the text, The Relativity of Deviance by John Kara, he describes mental disorders as being abnormal, lacking rhyme or reason. The biggest thing that I carried from this chapter is that it is a social construct that society made up to explain and to segregate those deemed abnormal. And I'll go on into this a little deeper later by applying conflict theory to this. And what we see here is, again, something that deviates from the norm. And he goes into more detail into it by explaining how we give labels. We, especially when the psychiatrist part comes into it, and how they even dive deeper into providing those labels for us. We also see in the articles how mental illness is taken advantage of by whiteness, in the legal system. And we'll continue and talk about that coming up soon. Characteristics of mental disorders continued. So in the article, Whiteness, Criminality, and the Double Standards of Deviance, Social Control by Nancy Heitzig. Labels of mental illness benefits white privilege. It goes in, this was a really fascinating read. It talks about whiteness is sickness, blackness is criminal. And when we say that is because when we see deviant individuals get in trouble, they're considered sick. Like the children at Columbine, a lot of people we found out were interested on what was wrong with, what led these children to act in such a way. Where when we see crimes done in Black communities, they immediately label it Black on Black crime. They don't really look more into what caused this individual to do this. They just feel like that's the norm for that race, And I will implement race, as a construct as well, because there's only one race, the human race. So mental disorders and violence in this other article, an empirical picture and context, it's a misnomer that mentally ill people are violent. According to this article, dual diagnosis contributes to the nonviolent portion. And mentioned that in a section stood out to me. Those that are dual diagnosed are those that have more than one disease, the disease of addiction, schizophrenia. They're battling, co-occurring disorders. So in here, it says right off the bat that a huge population are part of a nonviolent portion. And again, it goes back to sticking negative stigmas and ideals to a certain population that does not fit the norm. So leads us to biological versus socially. Now, according to Cura, when psychiatrists were unable to find structural abnormalities in the brain and trace them to particular signs and symptoms of mental illness, they were not discouraged. They merely invented mental diseases through the simple but effective strategy of proclaiming that certain specific attitudes, behaviors, and conditions were sick and in need of cure. So we see here, it even says flat out, psychiatrists invented. So again, that goes back to it's socially created. When we talk about, anxiety, because, you see anxiety, you see depression. Well, we don't see those. We actually see symptoms. We don't actually see that thing that's causing it. So again, it's going to where they're making up these names, these labels for these different symptoms to for all intents and purposes, for us to try to understand, but again, not scientifically based. Now, unlike a bona fide medical disease such as syphilis, tuberculosis, in which a known pathogen or abnormal body lesion produces a consistent constellation of signs and symptoms. So you see these in lesions, you see these in outbreaks. This is biological, and these are diseases. Again, and I tend to agree with Kira in this, that this is socially constructed. We use this for putting down people, for dividing people. And again, I'm going to tie this in back into conflict theory. Applying conflict theory. So we're going to see a lot of ideals that we read all the time within conflict theory, which is always working class versus the upper class, or the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. Again, for resources, we are going to look at basically medication coming into the picture and how these corporates took advantage of this. And you see this all the time. We're one of the only countries, what the article said, the US is one of the only countries, with the exception of New Zealand, that advertises directly to the consumer medication for depression, anxiety, erectile dysfunction, all this stuff. We sell drugs through commercials, and we talk people into feeling like they have an issue, and it said, Heitzig said best themselves, dope us up, lock us up, and divide. To me, we are all stronger when we band together. And I feel like this is another attempt from the bourgeoisie, the upper class, to separate us, to pit us up against one another, so we do not succeed. So we will not rise as a single unit and solidarity. Instead, we end up picking, and now we are segregating more. Already we segregate ourselves through race, sexism, ageism, and now we have mental illness that we are now going to separate another chunk of our population. Again, when we could be working together for the greater good, we get divided. And this is where I apply my conflict theory to.